We are entering another dimension. Dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey to a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination. At the signpost up ahead, your next stop, the Teacup Zone. Picture, if you will, a Matt who has 2 degrees, because that's me! And welcome back to another episode of Teacup For One, and today we are continuing my discussion on Disney's SEAverse. Now, if you've seen my last videos, you know that I believe the upcoming Jungle Cruise film is the first in a potential franchise of a shared universe based on the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. That's an Imagineering backstory that ties together attractions in Disney parks across the world. I've already discussed how I think the Jungle Cruise film will jumpstart the Disney SEAverse, but today I want to talk about another film that I think would be a natural follow-up in the franchise, a film based on one of my all-time favorite Disney park attractions, the Tower of Terror, also known as the Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror, also known as my favorite TV show of all time. Seriously, if I'm trapped on a desert island, all I need is Disney, Shakespeare, and the Twilight Zone. Or if I'm trapped in a multi-month quarantine. And I want to see the Tower of Terror on the big screen more than anybody, but not associated with the Twilight Zone. Because here's the thing with the Twilight Zone, the TV show, and the Tower of Terror, the ride. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, the Twilight Zone gave inspiration for the ride's incredible backstory. But, on the other hand, the Twilight Zone influence can't really exist in any way outside of the walls of the ride, because it's not owned by Disney. The Twilight Zone is owned by CBS. But that said, I'm not even sure that we would want a Tower of Terror movie to have anything to do with the Twilight Zone, because truth be told, the Twilight Zone doesn't really have a great track record of being adapted ever since the original series ended. The Twilight Zone is cemented into our culture as one of the most influential TV shows of all time. Just the term The Twilight Zone, that's become synonymous with kind of any weird paranormal activity, and then the show itself has been such a major influence on science fiction and fantasy. But, the mistake that a lot of Twilight Zone reboots make is that they lean too far into the supernatural elements without appreciating why those supernatural elements were in the TV show in the first place. First, we have to talk about Rod Serling. Before he created the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was already an established television writer. He had a lot he wanted to say about society and about the world, and he wanted to use his writing to say it. He said, "The writer's role is to be a menacer of the public's conscience. He must have a position, a point of view. He must see the arts as a vehicle of social criticism, and he must focus on the issues of his time." But the problem was that Rod Serling kept on coming up against censorship. It ranged from minuscule things, from not being able to reference a match in his script if the TV show is being sponsored by a lighter company, to much bigger issues. Most notably, he kept wanting to write something that would address the 1955 murder of Emmett Till, except the censorship kept on necessitating that he change the story to eliminate any elements of racially motivated violence, to the point where the story that he wanted to tell had nothing to do with the story that he was being forced to tell. That was when he decided to use science fiction to address and write about real-world issues. And with that philosophy, we got some of the most groundbreaking episodes of television ever. His views on McCarthyism and mob mentality gave us The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Society's obsession with beauty became Eye of the Beholder. PTSD was channeled through Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And the list just goes on and on and on. So the reason the original Twilight Zone was so good was because it created tension and made you feel uncomfortable with supernatural elements that were manifestations of real-world issues. But I find that anytime people try to reboot the Twilight Zone, they just focus on like the creepy supernatural elements. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at Walt Disney World is basically the exception to the rule. It leans into all these superficial, creepy Twilight Zone elements that we know and love from the TV show, with none of the Serling substance. But it's okay because it's a ride. It's an attraction. We're not going there for social commentary. We're going there to drop and fear for our lives. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened in 1994 at Disney's MGM Studios, now known as Disney's Hollywood Studios. At that point, the park was already 5 years old, and it was so popular that they knew they had to expand it, and in the expansion, they needed a classic Disney e-ticket attraction, one that would just draw people to the park. Ideally, one filled with thrills. They knew they wanted the attraction to be based in horror, but they also wanted it to jive with the park's overall theming of old-timey, glamorous vintage Hollywood, so they cycled through a bunch of ideas. They thought about doing an attraction based on the works of Stephen King. They thought about doing a Mel Brooks-inspired haunted castle, kind of in the vein of Young Frankenstein. For a while, apparently, they even considered having a haunted hotel that was both a thrill ride and a functional hotel, and honestly, that was a terrible idea. Like, imagine if the Tower of Terror was an actual hotel, you're trying to have a midday nap, and then you just hear, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" Anyway, they canned that idea, which was a good decision. Then they decided to have a haunted hotel ride, base it on the Twilight Zone, and then we got the Tower of Terror, and it was the best decision all around. Good job, Disney. Now, the backstory for the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror isn't actually based on any one specific Twilight Zone episode. It takes inspiration from the overall tone of the series. Basically, back in 1939, the Hollywood Tower Hotel was the place to be until Halloween night 1939. 5 people went into the elevator, lightning struck the hotel, the elevator crashed, and those 5 people disappeared and became ghosts. Or went to the Twilight Zone. The ride never really elaborates on that. It was actually turned into a film in 1997 for The Wonderful World of Disney, and it has kind of become the butt of a lot of jokes. It's like one of the worst Disney films ever made. But in its defense, it's not actually a bad movie. I mean, it has all the hallmarks of a really cheesy 90s made-for-TV movie, like Steve Guttenberg. But I would say that it is the only film so far, based on a Disney Parks ride, that successfully adapts the ride's backstory into a feature-length film. It fleshes out all 5 ghosts into clear characters with distinct motivations. It does a great job with the 1930s nostalgic vibe. It has a pretty great twist ending, and the film's climax, where the elevator plummets down 13 stories, is actually pretty thrilling, especially for a made-for-TV movie. Now, I'm biased because Tower of Terror is my favorite ride maybe in the world, minus the drop, which is kind of ironic. But if we're discussing how the Tower of Terror can fit into Disney's SEAverse, we need to go overseas to Tokyo DisneySEA. You see? The Tower of Terror exists at Tokyo DisneySEA, and the basic concept is the same as the ride at Disney's Hollywood Studios. You have a haunted hotel with an elevator that goes up, and then it turns into a drop ride. But aside from that, the theming and the backstory are completely different. Tokyo DisneySEA weaves their Tower of Terror into the Society of Explorers and Adventurers' overarching narrative. And if it were to be made into a film, it would tie in perfectly with the Jungle Cruise. Tokyo DisneySEA's Tower of Terror is based on the misadventures of Harrison Hightower III. Get it? Hightower? Because it's a high tower. Hightower. Anyway, Harrison Hightower III was a member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, albeit a corrupted one. And during an expedition along the Congo River, he encountered a tribe that worshipped an idol of the god Shoriki Otundu. Now, according to legend, the idol had a pretty bloody history as well as a track record of sending people who disrespected him to a jungle of eternal night. Obviously, Harrison didn't believe any of these legends or rumors, but he wanted the idol for his collection. So he offered money to the tribe. The tribe said no. So what did Harrison do? He stole it. As soon as he arrives home in New York City, he arranges a press conference. It's New Year's Eve, 1899. He shows off his new acquisition to the world, and then, just before the clock strikes midnight, he boards an elevator to take his new idol up to his penthouse suite. But as soon as the clock strikes midnight, you know what else strikes? Lightning, because Shoriki Utundu comes to life, and then he summons green lightning to strike Hightower Hotel. Harrison's elevator plummets down 13 plus stories, and then when they open the elevator, Harrison has disappeared, and the idol remains, grinning Now this is a most excellent foundation for a Tower of Terror movie for a few reasons. First, even though Tokyo DisneySEA's Tower of Terror has nothing to do with the Twilight Zone, the backstory actually fits the mold of a Rod Serling morality story pretty well. It's the story of a greedy individual who faces supernatural consequences for his immoral actions. Second of all, it would not be difficult whatsoever to base a film around Harrison High Tower and the Tokyo DisneySEA Tower of Terror, while also including elements from Disney's Hollywood Studios Tower of Terror. So you could have a movie that incorporates the turn-of-the-century High Tower Hotel with the glitz and glamour of the 1930s Hollywood Tower Hotel, and it would also give some insight into why those 5 people disappeared in the Hollywood Tower. Just hear me out. It's 1899, and Harrison Hightower III is building his empire, starting with High Tower Hotel in the middle of New York City. And because that was such a success, he begins construction on a second location in Hollywood. Fun fact, the real-life Hollywood Hotel opened up in 1902, so the history does line up. Hightower disappears New Year's Eve 1900, his estate is sold off, and then the Hightower Hollywood Hotel becomes the Hollywood Tower Hotel and goes under new ownership and new management. But if the Winchester Mystery House has taught us anything, it's that hauntings and ghosts, or in this case curses, are prone to following families. And so even though Hightower doesn't own the Hollywood Tower Hotel, it still has his curse. Fast forward to 1939, it is almost 4 decades later. The world has all but forgotten about Harrison Hightower, and the Hollywood Tower Hotel has become the place to be in Hollywood if you are a celebrity. Then, Halloween night, those 5 people go into the elevator. It is struck by lightning the same way that High Tower Hotel in New York was struck by lightning 39 years prior. 5 people disappear, just like High Tower disappeared 39 years prior. Oh, that would be such a good movie. I should write it. Disney, please call me. Okay, and finally, cherry on top, we have the already established mythology of Shoriki Utundu. This is an idol who reportedly has the power to send people to a jungle of eternal night filled with snakes and other creepy crawly things. And if we are working with the idea that the Jungle Cruise film is jump-starting the DisneySEAverse, that connection basically speaks for itself.
The myth is real.
But of course, there's always the other possibility that there won't be a DisneySEAverse, we won't get a Tower of Terror movie based on either parks, and instead, the rides themselves will just all be rethemed to Guardians of the Galaxy. Anyway, folks, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup For One. Please let me know in the comment section down below, would you rather see a big screen adaptation of Disney's Hollywood Studios Tower of Terror with the 5 ghosts in the 1930s Hollywood, or Tokyo DisneySEA's Tower of Terror with turn-of-the-century New York City? Or would you like to see a movie written by me that combines them into one giant historical sweeping epic? I mean, I know what I'd pick. If you enjoyed this video and you want to hear me talk even more about Disney or the potential of a DisneySEAverse, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. It's super easy. All you need to do is click on my face. Thank you for joining us once again, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Teacup For One. Okay, go away.